My girlfriend said while hiking in the Swiss Alps. Maybe I need a future that feels less predictable. I encouraged her honesty, completed my work assignment in Zurich, and eventually she learned my direction had changed in ways she never anticipated. Maybe I need a future that feels less predictable. She said it quietly, almost like she was testing the words in her own mouth before deciding whether they were truly hers. The wind off the ridge cut sideways across us, cold and sharp, and for a moment I just stood there watching her stare out at the valley below. We were somewhere above Grindelwald, maybe 2 hours into a trail that was supposed to be a romantic morning hike. The Alps stretched in every direction, white peaks and gray stone, and that particular blue that you only ever see at altitude, the kind that makes the sky look almost fake. It was the kind of view people fly across the world to see, and Nadia was using it as a backdrop to tell me she might be done with us. I didn't say anything right away. I just pulled the zipper on my jacket up another inch and looked at the same horizon she was looking at. There's something strange about receiving news like that in a place that beautiful. Like the scenery refuses to match the moment, and you end up feeling seasick from the contradiction. Okay, I finally said. She turned to look at me. I think she expected something louder. Okay, she repeated. Tell me what you mean, I said. I'm not going to guess. She exhaled, and her breath made a small cloud in the cold air. I just feel like I already know how everything plays out, she said. With us, with you, with the next 5 years. And that bothers you. It wasn't a question. She nodded slowly. It used to feel safe, she said. Now it just feels like a ceiling. I'm 31. At that point, Nadia and I had been together for 3 years. I had been in Zurich for 4 months on a work assignment, and she had flown in from London to spend 10 days with me. It was the first time we'd been in the same city in almost 8 weeks. I remember thinking, before she arrived, that the trip would fix something. That the Alps and the clean air and the distance from our usual routines would reset whatever had been going slightly flat between us. I was wrong about that, but I didn't fully understand how wrong until that ridge. We had met in London 3 years earlier at a product strategy conference that neither of us had particularly wanted to attend. She was a brand consultant, sharp and funny, and one of those people who commands a room without appearing to try. I was mid-level at a corporate finance advisory firm, working long hours and spending too much money on coffee and not enough time on anything that mattered personally. We started dating 3 weeks after that conference. For the first year, it was everything. She was the most interesting person I had ever been with, and I think for a while I was a version of myself around her that I genuinely liked. But the second year got quieter, and the third year got quieter still. Not in a dramatic way, just in the way that water gets colder when you walk deeper into the sea, gradual, unannounced, and eventually undeniable. The Zurich assignment had come out of nowhere, or at least that was how it felt at the time. A senior partner at my firm had put my name forward for a restructuring project with a major Swiss client. 6 months, possibly extending to 9. High visibility, serious numbers, the kind of project that either makes your career or ends it quietly. I said yes before I fully thought it through. Nadia said she understood. She said that at least twice, in different tones, on different evenings. The first time, she meant it. The second time, I wasn't sure she did. By the time I actually landed in Zurich, there was already a distance between us that had nothing to do with flight hours. She came out to visit in the 4th month, which was also the hardest month of the project. The client, a mid-sized manufacturing conglomerate, was in the middle of a quiet crisis that nobody external was supposed to know about, and I was one of 4 people on our side trying to restructure their debt exposure before a window closed. The work was consuming in a way that I had never experienced before. Not just long hours, but the kind of mental occupation that follows you to bed and wakes you up at 4 in the morning. I was proud of it. I was also completely exhausted by it. Nadia arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I met her at the airport, and I remember thinking she looked different. Not physically. She looked the same, dark hair, the coat she always wore, the small silver earrings she'd had since before I met her. But there was something in her face that I couldn't name then. I can name it now. She looked like someone who had already made a decision and was just waiting to say it out loud. The first 3 days were fine, or close to it. We walked along the Limmat, ate at a small restaurant near Niederdorf that my colleague Felix had recommended, and spent a Sunday afternoon in a museum where neither of us read the placards, but both of us pretended to. She was charming and funny and present in all the ways I had missed. I let myself believe the distance had been circumstantial, that it was just the geography and the work hours and the exhaustion. On Wednesday, I had a full day at the client's offices. She took herself to a spa and then messaged me at noon saying she felt better than she had in months. I remember reading that message between meetings and feeling relieved. That evening, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table of my rented apartment with her laptop open and a half-empty glass of Riesling beside her. She was writing something. Work? I asked. No, she said. Just thinking. She closed the laptop. How is it today? She asked. Intense, I said. Good intense or survival intense? Both, I said. It's going well, though. She nodded, but there was something behind her eyes. Something she wasn't saying yet. The hike was her idea, actually. She had looked up trails the night before and said she wanted to go further out, not just the city walks. I booked us a train to Grindelwald the next morning, and we were on the trail by 9. For the first hour, it was easy and good. She talked about a client project back in London that was frustrating her. I talked about something unrelated to work entirely, deliberately, because I had been sensing that she felt she was competing with it. But then we got high enough that the conversation dropped off. And in that silence, something shifted. I could feel it before she said anything. The way she stopped walking to look at the view. The way she didn't turn around right away when I said something behind her. And then she said it. Maybe I need a future that feels less predictable. We stood there for a while after that. Not arguing. Not crying. Just standing at altitude in the cold. The way two people sometimes do when they have run out of the right words and are waiting to see who finds them first. Is this about the assignment? I asked eventually. No, she said. It's about what the assignment revealed. I looked at her. Which is what exactly? She took a breath. That you're on a track, she said. A very specific track. And you're going to be on it for the next 20 years. And I'm supposed to what? Walk beside it. Like I'm adjacent to your life rather than in it. There it was. That was the real thing. It hadn't been about distance or long hours or even the assignment itself. It was about a feeling she'd been carrying for longer than 4 months. The feeling of being parallel to someone instead of intertwined with them. I heard her. Genuinely. And I didn't deflect. You're right that I'm on a track, I said. I won't pretend otherwise. But I think you've made some assumptions about where that track leads. She looked at me. What does that mean? It means I've been thinking too, I said. And maybe you don't have the most current version of my plans. She smiled, but it was a small smile, slightly sad. Everyone on your kind of track says that, she said. They say it right up until they don't. I didn't argue. There wasn't a point in arguing on a mountain. Some conversations need ground under them. We walked back down mostly in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than the one on the way up. Less cold. More like two people separately thinking rather than two people retreating. That evening, back in Zurich, we talked until nearly 1 in the morning. She was honest in a way she hadn't been in a long time. She said she had started to feel invisible in the context of my ambition. She said she felt like a footnote in a story about someone else. She said she was 30 and she had things she wanted too, not just alongside my things, but her own things, separate and real. I listened. I really listened. Not the kind of listening where you're drafting your response while the other person is still talking. The actual kind. And when she was finished, I said, I'm glad you said all of that. I mean it, I added. Because now at least we're being honest. I don't want you to perform contentment with me. I never wanted that. She looked surprised. You're not upset? She asked. I am, I said. But not at you. I'm more interested in what's actually true than in what feels comfortable right now. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. That's what I mean, you know, she said softly. You're so composed. All the time. Sometimes I just want you to lose it a little. To need me in a way that's messy. I held her hand and said nothing. Because I didn't know how to explain that the composure wasn't a mask. It was just how I was built. And I didn't think I should have to apologize for it. She left on the 9th day instead of the 10th. Not dramatically. She just said she had a client call she'd moved twice already and she needed to be in London for it. I drove her to the airport. We kissed goodbye at the departure doors, and it was warm and real and also felt slightly like a full stop. Call me tonight, she said. I will, I said. I did. We talked for 40 minutes. She sounded lighter. I sounded the same as always, I suppose. Over the following 3 weeks, we called regularly, texted daily, existed in that particular configuration of a long-distance relationship that functions but doesn't quite thrive. And I threw myself back into work. What was happening at the client's offices during those weeks is hard to explain without getting into details I won't get into. But the short version is this. The restructuring we had been brought in to manage quietly had become significantly more complex than the initial brief suggested. There were problems layered inside problems, the kind of financial architecture that takes years to build and very specific expertise to untangle. My senior partner, Werner, flew in from London for a week of intensive sessions. He was in his mid-50s, the kind of man who had seen every version of a corporate crisis that exists and had stopped being surprised by any of them. We worked 16-hour days that week. We ate bad sandwiches in conference rooms and argued about modeling assumptions at 11 at night. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, something clicked for me. Not just about the project, about myself, about what I was actually capable of and what I actually wanted to build. There's a version of ambition that's inherited. You do it because it's what people like you do, because the track was laid before you got there and it seemed like the only reasonable direction. I had been on that kind of ambition since my mid-20s. Finance degree, graduate scheme, progression, Zurich, next rung, next rung. But that week, sitting in a glass-walled conference room above the Zurich Sea at midnight with Werner drawing diagrams on a whiteboard, I felt something different. I felt like I was actually choosing. Like the work wasn't a track I was following. Like it was something I was actively building, in real time, with real stakes. And I realized there was a version of my future that I had never seriously considered. Not because it wasn't possible, but because I had never given myself permission to want it. By the end of Werner's visit, two things had happened. First, we had made a significant breakthrough on the restructuring that changed the timeline and the outcome for the client. Second, Werner had a conversation with me that I wasn't expecting. It was a Friday evening. The client's team had gone home. Werner and I were alone in the conference room, and he closed his laptop and looked at me in the way that men like him look at you when they have something real to say. "You know what you did this week?" he said. "I have some idea," I said. "You saw the thing nobody else saw," he said. "The exposure buried in the subsidiary structure. That was the thing that unraveled everything else. That was you." I nodded. "I've been watching you since you got here," he said. "Not just this week. Since you arrived 4 months ago. You operate differently than the others. You're quieter about it. But the work is more precise." I didn't say anything. I had learned a long time ago that when someone like Werner is saying something, you let them finish. "I want to talk to you about something," he said. "Something that's been in discussion at senior partner level for about 3 months. But I didn't want to raise it until I'd seen you in a situation like this week." He paused. "We're opening a standalone advisory practice," he said, "focused on distressed asset restructuring in the European mid-market. Zurich-based. We want to build the team around 2 or 3 people who understand this landscape at the level you demonstrated this week. And I want you to be one of them." I looked at him. "As in a founding team role," I said. "Not as in a senior analyst role." "Correct," he said. "We would be bringing you in at partner level. That is not a typical progression at your age. But this is not a typical situation." The room was very quiet. Outside the windows, the lake reflected the last of the evening light. "I need you to think about it seriously," he said. "And I need you to understand what it would require. This is not a London position," he said. "This is Zurich. Long term. Maybe permanently." I looked at the lake. "How long do I have to think?" I asked. "A few weeks," he said. "No more than that." I did not tell Nadia about this conversation that night. I told her I'd had a good week and that Werner had been pleased with the work. I kept it vague, not because I was hiding it exactly, but because I needed to think about it in my own head first, without it becoming a negotiation. And because, honestly, I needed to understand what I actually wanted before I explained it to someone else. I sat with it for days. I took long walks along the lake in the early mornings before work, which is something I had started doing in Zurich and which had become necessary rather than optional. I thought about the trajectory I had been on. I thought about what Werner had said. I thought about Nadia on the ridge above Grindelwald, saying she needed a future that felt less predictable. And slowly, the shape of something became clear to me. The project wrapped its primary phase about 3 weeks after Werner's visit. The client was stable. The restructuring was holding. The public-facing version of the story was that a consulting firm had provided strategic advisory support during a period of refinancing. The actual version was that without the work done in those 6 months, there would have been a very different kind of headline. Our team flew back to London for a review week. I attended the meetings, presented the outcomes, shook hands, received the congratulations. And then I sat down with Werner in his office on the 4th floor and told him my answer. "Yes," I said. "I'm in, but I have conditions." He raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead," he said. "Equity structure needs to be real," I said. "Not symbolic. If I'm founding, I'm founding. I want the title to reflect the actual role from the start, not after a trial period. And I want authority over the team I build. Full authority, not co-signed. Werner looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Fine, he said. Write it up. I'll have legal review it. You can negotiate the specifics with them. But in principle, yes. I looked at him. You're not surprised by the conditions, I said. No, he said. I'd have been more concerned if you hadn't had any. I flew back to Zurich 4 days later. The new practice wasn't officially launched yet. There were months of structural work ahead. Legal, regulatory, branding, hiring. But I had committed. And something in me had quietly settled. I called Nadia that evening from my apartment. She was at home in London, she said. She had a glass of wine. Her voice was warm, the way it often was in evenings. We talked about her week for a while. A client she was excited about. A presentation she'd given that had landed well. She was good at her work, genuinely. She had a clarity about creative and brand problems that I had always admired. After a while, she asked, So how long do you think you'll still be there? In Zurich, I mean. I paused. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about, I said. A beat of silence on her end. Okay, she said. Her voice shifted slightly. Not alarmed, but attentive. Something came up, I said. An opportunity. Actually, it's more than an opportunity. It's a significant decision. I told her about Werner's offer. I told her about the founding team, the partner role, the Zurich base. I told her that I had already accepted. I did not soften it. I did not present it as a discussion, because it wasn't. The decision was mine, and I had made it. There was a long pause after I finished. You already accepted, she said. Not a question. Yes, I said. Without talking to me. Without even mentioning it was a possibility. I needed to know what I wanted first, I said. Before it became a conversation about what we wanted. Because those are different things, and I think we've been confusing them for a while. Another pause. So you're staying in Zurich, she said. Permanently. That's what it looks like, yes, I said. For the foreseeable future. Possibly longer. She let out a long breath. I don't know what to say, she said. You don't have to say anything tonight, I said. But I think you know what this means for us, I said. Or at least, I think we both knew. For longer than we've been admitting. She didn't respond to that directly. She said she needed to think. She said she'd call me tomorrow. She did call me the next day. And the day after that. Over the following 2 weeks, we had this slow, careful, adult kind of breakup that happens between two people who care about each other but have stopped being able to build in the same direction. There were no dramatic scenes. No accusations. No one villain. She had said on that ridge that she needed something less predictable. And somewhere in the act of encouraging her honesty, I had quietly been building the most unexpected version of myself I had ever produced. That's the thing nobody tells you about inviting someone to be honest with you. Sometimes their honesty is the catalyst for yours. The official end came on a Sunday night phone call in the 6th week after my return to Zurich. We had both known it was coming. It wasn't cold, but it was clear. She said she had thought about it extensively. She said she respected what I was building. She said she genuinely hoped it went the way I was hoping. She also said that she couldn't spend her 30s waiting to see whether a life in Switzerland would eventually feel like hers. I don't want to resent you, she said. And I think I would. Eventually. If I stayed in something I'd outgrown just because leaving felt harder than it was worth. I listened to that. I don't want you to stay out of inertia either, I said. That was never what I wanted from you. I know, she said softly. That's actually part of what made this hard. You were never the problem. We were just going different places. And we both took too long to say it. We said goodbye. It was the kind of goodbye that feels final in the right way. Not like a door slamming. More like a light going off in a room you've already left. The months after that were different. Not empty, exactly, but quieter in a personal sense. I poured myself into the architecture of the new practice with a focus that I hadn't had access to before, because before there had always been something else pulling at the edges of my attention. Now there wasn't. Werner introduced me to the 2 other founding partners, Conrad, who had been running a boutique restructuring desk in Frankfurt, and a woman named Adele who had spent 8 years at a regulatory authority in Brussels and understood the compliance terrain in ways that were worth more than her formal title suggested. The 3 of us worked well together from the first meeting, different in style, compatible in substance. We argued about things that mattered and agreed quickly on things that didn't. It was the most functional professional dynamic I had ever been part of. We spent 4 months building the practice from the inside out before we took on our first external mandate. That first mandate was smaller than what I had been working on during the Zurich assignment. but it was ours. Entirely. No firm name above us. No senior partner to approve our recommendations. No process to follow that someone else had inherited from someone else. We built it from the analysis up. And when we delivered, the client, a family-owned industrial group from northern Italy trying to navigate a cross-border acquisition that had gone sideways, walked away from the table with a solution they had been told didn't exist. Conrad celebrated that night with a bottle of something expensive that he'd apparently been saving for a specific occasion. I drank a glass and felt something that I had not felt in a long time. Satisfaction without asterisk. 6 months into the practice, I ran into someone who knew Nadia, a woman named Petra, who was a friend of hers from London and who had moved to Geneva the previous year for a job at an international NGO. She was in Zurich for the day, and we met for coffee almost by accident. She had been at the same hotel lobby where I was meeting a client, and we recognized each other from a dinner years ago. We sat and talked for 40 minutes. She was careful at first, clearly aware that Nadia and I had ended things, clearly unsure how much to say. I kept it easy, asked about her work, listened genuinely. She relaxed. Eventually she said, "Nadia talks about you, you know." Sometimes, she added. Not obsessively. Just in that way people do when something still sits with them. "I hope she's well," I said. And I meant it. "She is," Petra said. "She started her own consultancy, actually, 6 months ago. It's going really well. She's good at it." I smiled. "That doesn't surprise me at all," I said. "She was always going to do that eventually." Petra looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. "She said you'd say something like that," she said. "She said you always saw things about her that she hadn't decided yet. It used to unsettle her. Now I think she considers it a compliment." I drank my coffee. "Tell her I'm proud of her," I said. "If it comes up. If it doesn't, don't force it." Petra nodded. "I will," she said. We parted ways outside the hotel. I watched her walk toward the tram stop and then walked the other direction toward the lake, the way I always did when I needed a few minutes before the next thing. A week later, Nadia messaged me. Not a long message. Just, "Petra told me what you said. Thank you. I hope Zurich is everything it was supposed to be. X." I held my phone for a moment. Then I typed back, "It is. Congratulations on the consultancy. I always knew you would." She replied with a single line, "You knew before I did. That was always the problem and the gift." I read that a few times. Then I put my phone face down on my desk and went back to work. The practice grew in its second year in ways that were hard to predict and impossible to force. The mid-market restructuring space in Europe was, it turned out, significantly underserved at the advisory level. Large firms had the scale, but not the precision. Small boutiques had the boutique feel, but not the credibility. What we had built occupied a specific and increasingly valuable middle space, and word traveled in the way that word travels in that world, slowly, through trust, through outcomes, through the particular reputation that forms when you deliver repeatedly, without making noise about it. By the end of year 2, we had a team of 11. 4 senior advisors, 5 analysts, and 2 support staff who were better at their jobs than most senior people I had worked with at the firm. Conrad had relocated his life to Zurich fully. Adele remained between Brussels and Zurich, but leaned further toward us with each month. I had moved out of the short-term rental I had been living in since my original assignment, and found an apartment near Seefeld with a view I had not expected to be able to afford, and which I spent a disproportionate amount of time appreciating. It was real. My life in Zurich was fully, genuinely real. Not an assignment. Not a temporary detour. A life. There is a certain kind of person who, when they learn that things have turned out well for you, responds with a reevaluation of their own earlier position. Not dishonestly, just honestly, in a way that arrives late. I got a call from Nadia in the spring of that second year. Not a message this time. A call. She sounded different. Her voice was still hers, still warm, still precise in that way she always was. But there was something else in it. Something I recognized from people who have been thinking about something for a long time and finally decide to say it. "I heard about the practice," she said, "through a contact in London. Apparently, you're getting a reputation." "Apparently," I said. "People are talking about it in very specific terms," she said. "The kind of terms that suggest it's not just going well. It's going unusually well." "I'm glad," I said. "Me too," she said. "For you." A pause. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest," she said. "When I said what I said on the mountain," she continued, "about needing something less predictable, did you already know something was coming?" "I thought about that. Not in a specific way," I said. I didn't know about Werner's offer when we had that conversation. That came 2 weeks later. But did I know that things were going to change? Probably yes. Not the details, but the direction. You could feel it, she said. It wasn't exactly a question. I could feel that I was approaching something, I said. I didn't know what shape it would take. But yes, I knew the track I was on was about to become something I was actively steering instead of just following. Silence on her end for a moment. And you didn't tell me, she said. Because I didn't have the words yet, I said. And because I think part of me also heard what you said on that mountain and believed you. I believed that you needed something I wasn't going to be able to give you. Even if everything went perfectly, I still wasn't going to be in London. I was still going to be building something far away. And you were always going to need to be the center of your own story, not adjacent to mine. Another pause. That's very perceptive, she said. Her voice was slightly uneven. It's also slightly infuriating, she added. Because you're right. I didn't say anything. I think I expected you to fight for it more, she said. For us. After the mountain. I know, I said. But fighting for something that's already honestly named feels like the wrong kind of loyalty. You named it honestly. I respected that. Fighting it wouldn't have been respect. It would have been just noise. She was quiet. I'm not calling to reopen anything, she said finally. I need you to know that. I know, I said. I just wanted to say, she continued, that I underestimated you. Not your ambition. Not your ability. I underestimated the direction of it. I thought I knew where the track led. And I was wrong. I was very specifically wrong. I let that sit in the air for a moment. You weren't wrong about what you needed, I said. Don't confuse those two things. You being right about what you needed doesn't mean you were wrong about me. It just means we both saw clearly. In different directions. She laughed softly, unexpectedly. You're very difficult, she said. To be angry at. Even when you deserve it. Do I deserve it? I asked. A little, she said. For always being right. About the things that matter. I thought about that conversation for days afterward. Not with regret. With something closer to clarity. There is a version of this story, the version Nadia had been holding for part of that second year, in which she was the one who got away, and I was the one who built something brilliant and empty. I understood why that version made sense from where she was standing. When someone chooses work over relationship, the easy narrative writes itself. But the full version was more complicated. I had not chosen work over Nadia. I had chosen a direction. And part of that direction was the recognition that what Nadia and I had, for all its warmth and for all that was genuine in it, had run its honest course. She had said as much on that mountain. Not vindicatively. Truthfully. And I had done her the respect of believing her. That's not the same as walking away. It's the same as walking forward. There's a difference. In the early autumn of that second year, I flew to London for a series of meetings. 3 days, 2 client pitch sessions, 1 dinner with Werner, who had since retired from the firm, but remained an informal advisor to the practice, and who aged better every time I saw him. On the second evening, I walked through a part of the city I had lived in for years without thinking about it. Past the coffee shop I used to be a regular at. Past the conference center where I had met Nadia. Past the kind of landmarks that accumulate meaning before you realize you're assigning any. London felt like a previous chapter. Not a lost one. Not a painful one. Just earlier. I flew back to Zurich the next morning and landed to an early October sky that had the particular clarity that the city gets before the cold sets in properly. I took a taxi to the office. Adele was already there. Conrad was on a call. There were 3 new engagement proposals on my desk. I made a coffee, sat down, and started reading. Nadia launched something significant the following spring. A rebrand for a company that had been struggling with identity across the European market. The campaign apparently became something people in the brand world talked about for months. I saw a piece about it in an industry publication. I read it properly. She was quoted saying something about how the best creative decisions come from a place of clarity about what you're not. I understood that. I understood it in the way you understand things that someone you used to love says when they've grown into themselves. With distance and something close to pride. Not possession. Just the particular warmth that comes from having known someone in an earlier version and recognizing, from the outside, that they found the version they were looking for. People ask me sometimes, usually people who know bits of the story, colleagues, old friends from London, whether I have any regrets. Whether there's a version of things I would have done differently. I don't answer it quickly. I give it the actual consideration it deserves. And the honest answer is, no. Not because things turned out well for me, though they did. But because the decisions were true. I didn't leave Nadia. We arrived, separately and simultaneously, at an honest conclusion. I didn't take the Werner opportunity out of ambition alone. I took it because it was the first time a professional decision had felt like a genuine choice rather than a default continuation. I didn't stay in Zurich because I had nowhere else to go. I stayed because this was where the thing I was building existed. And the thing I was building was real. The rest of it, the lake views, the early morning walks, the particular quality of silence in the Alps when you're high enough that the world below stops being audible, that was the landscape. Beautiful, yes, but secondary. The primary thing was what I had chosen to do with the years I was given, and I had chosen clearly. I spoke to Petra again the following year. She was in Zurich for a conference, and we had dinner near the old town. She was easy company, and we had reached the point by then where Nadia was just a subject, not a subtext. She's seeing someone, Petra said. Someone from the creative world. They've been together almost a year. He sounds interesting. She sounds happy. Good, I said. I mean it. Petra looked at me over her wine glass. You know what she said about you, she said. Recently, I mean. What did she say? I asked. She said you were the most honest person she ever dated. And the most unsettling. Because honesty that calm, Petra said, smiling slightly, makes other people question everything they're holding back. I considered that. I'll take it, I said. Petra laughed. You should, she said. She meant it as a compliment. Eventually. I still go back to Grindelwald sometimes. Not often. Once a year, maybe. I go alone or occasionally with Conrad, who has developed an unexpected enthusiasm for hiking that he attributes to Zurich's geography, and I attribute to his need to have a space where nobody can call him. Last autumn, I was on the same ridge. Same direction, same view. Same blue sky that looks too perfect to be real. I stood there for a while, not thinking about Nadia specifically, just thinking about the conversation that had happened in that exact spot a few years earlier. About what she had said, about what I had said back, about the strange way that a person asking for honesty from you can unlock an honesty you didn't know you were sitting on. She had said she needed a future that felt less predictable. She was right. She had found that. And I had found something I hadn't known I was looking for. Not unpredictability. Something better. Direction that was entirely my own. Not inherited. Not default. Not the next rung on someone else's ladder. Mine. Chosen in a glass-walled conference room above the Zurich Sea at midnight. Confirmed at a table across from a man who looked at me and saw something worth betting on. Built, slowly and precisely, over years that turned out to be exactly as long as they needed to be. I looked at the valley below for another few minutes. Then I turned around and started walking back down the mountain. There was work on my desk. Good work. Work that mattered. And I had somewhere to be.